You're riding shotgun, your friend gets pulled over for speeding on the Broadway extension. The officer walks up, looks past the driver and locks eyes on you and says, "I'm going to need your ID too." Here's what most passengers do not understand. The rules that apply to you are completely different from the rules that apply to the driver. Most passengers think they have to do whatever the driver has to do. That's one of the biggest legal mistakes you can make during a traffic stop. That gap between what the officer asked for and what the law actually requires is exactly where people lose their rights they never had to give up. The rules that apply to the driver and the rules that apply to you are not the same. And that gap between what an officer asked for and what the law actually requires is where people give up rights they never had to surrender. And before this video is done, I will show you the one scenario that sends Oklahoma passengers home with criminal charges for something they absolutely had nothing to do with. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly when you have to identify yourself, when you don't, what you should say if an officer wants to search you, and why one common traffic stop can leave an innocent passenger facing criminal charges for something they swear wasn't theirs. The most important thing to understand, the thing that changes every decision you make during a traffic stop, is this. The officer stopped the driver, not you. The traffic violation, whether it's speeding, a broken taillight, or expired tag, belongs to the driver. Simply being in the car does not automatically make you a suspect. The officer can absolutely talk to you, ask your name, ask where you're headed, make small talk to see if you seem nervous. All of that's permitted. But here's the distinction that matters. An officer can ask you a question without having the legal authority to require you to answer it. Police ask for plenty of things the law doesn't actually require people to provide. In Oklahoma, there's no general law requiring you to identify yourself simply because an officer asks. And being a passenger during a routine traffic stop by itself does not give an officer legal grounds to require your identification, unless the officer has independent, individualized, reasonable suspicion that you committed, are committing, or about to commit a crime, separate from whatever the driver did. You generally are not legally required to identify yourself. This isn't a loophole or technicality. It's a well-established principle under both Oklahoma law and the Fourth Amendment. The stop is about the driver. Unless the facts change, you are simply a passenger along for the ride. Now that you know where you stand legally, here's exactly how to respond. When the officer turns to you and asks to see your ID, here's what you say calmly and clearly. "Officer, am I being detained or am I free to go?" That question does one very important thing. It clarifies your legal status. If you're free to leave, that tells you you're not being detained. If the officer says you're being detained, your next question is, what crime do you suspect me of committing? That question makes the officer articulate whether they have individualized, reasonable suspicion to detain you. If they don't, that becomes an important issue if the detention is later challenged in court. Just as important as what you say is how you say it. Stay calm. Keep your hands where the officer can see them. Your tone should communicate one thing. You're asserting your rights, not challenging the officer's authority. If the officer pushes back, say, "Officer, I'm not trying to be difficult. My understanding is that as a passenger, I'm not required to identify myself unless I'm being lawfully detained." Then stop talking. The biggest mistake people make after asserting their rights is feeling like they need to explain themselves. They don't. I've represented clients who talked for 30 seconds longer than they needed to, and those 30 seconds became the officer evidence relied on to justify extending the stop. Silence can't be misunderstood or taken out of context. Use it. Just as important as knowing your right is knowing how to exercise them. Stay calm. Keep your hands where the officer can see them. Don't interrupt the officer. Don't raise your voice. Your goal isn't to win an argument on the side of the road. Your goal is to protect your rights while giving the officer no reason to escalate the encounter. If the officer pushes back, say, "Officer, I'm not trying to be difficult. My understanding is that as a passenger, I'm not required to identify myself unless I'm lawfully detained." Then stop talking. Every word you add after asserting your rights gives the officer more to work with. One of the biggest mistakes people make is feeling like they have to explain why they're asserting their rights. You don't. So you've handled the ID question correctly. That doesn't mean the encounter is over. In fact, what usually happens next catches most passengers completely off guard. The Supreme Court settled this in Maryland v. Wilson. An officer can order you out of the vehicle during a traffic stop for officer safety purposes. If they do, you get out of the car. That rule applies in Oklahoma. If the officer says step out, you step out. No argument. But don't confuse complying with that order as giving up your rights. It does not mean you have to consent to anything. Getting out of the vehicle does not mean you're consenting to a search. It does not mean you've waived any of your constitutional rights. The order to exit is about officer safety and nothing else. Once you're standing outside that car, your rights are exactly the same as they were when you were sitting inside the vehicle. Now comes the question officers are often hoping you'll answer without thinking. Do you mind if I search you? Whether it's in your pockets, your bag, your purse, anything you're carrying, here is what you say: I do not consent to a search. That's because consent is one of the most common legal justifications for a warrantless search. If you voluntarily agree, you've made that search much more difficult to challenge later. If you clearly refuse consent and the officer searches you anyway, your attorney can evaluate whether that search violated your Fourth Amendment rights. I've handled cases where that challenge was the difference between a dropped criminal charge and a conviction. Now, there's one important exception you need to understand. If the officer has reasonable, articulable suspicion that you're armed and dangerous, they can conduct a limited pat-down search of your outer clothing for weapons. Outer clothing only. That's been the law since the Supreme Court decision in Terry v. Ohio. But a Terry frisk has strict constitutional limits. Its purpose is to look for weapons, not to search for evidence of a crime. That generally means patting down the outside of your clothing. If during that frisk, the officer immediately recognizes something that is obviously a weapon, or under the plain field doctrine, immediately recognizes contraband without further manipulation, they may be able to retrieve it. A Terry frisk does not automatically authorize officers to go through your backpack, your purse, your wallet, or your cell phone. Those are separate searches governed by different legal rules. If a limited pat-down turns into a full evidentiary search without a lawful justification, your attorney may have grounds to challenge that search in court. If the officer tells you they're going to frisk you, don't physically resist, even if you believe it's unlawful. Instead, clearly state loud enough for the body camera to capture, "I do not consent to a search." That record matters. Those words preserve your objection without escalating the encounter, and they can matter later if the legality of the search is challenged in court. Now, let's talk about the situation that catches more passengers completely off guard than almost anything else. The officer walks up to the window, leans in, and says 3 words that change the entire stop: "I smell marijuana." When an officer claims to smell marijuana, that gives them probable cause to search the entire vehicle, not just the driver's side, the whole car. And when they search, anything found in your area, under your seat, in the door pocket next to you, in a bag at your feet, can be charged to you under a legal theory called constructive possession. Here's what that looks like in practice. A 22-year-old woman, no prior record, rides in the back seat of her friend's car. She has nothing on her. Her friend has a small bag of marijuana tucked under the driver's seat. The officer smells it, searches the car, finds the bag. Now she is facing a possession charge because it was within her reach and control. Now she's sitting in the back of a patrol car trying to explain that it isn't hers. Prosecutors may argue she exercised dominion or control over the area where it was found. Whether that argument succeeds depends on the facts, but by then, she's already dealing with criminal charges. I've received this call more times than I can count. Good people, no criminal record, just in the wrong car at the wrong time. If that situation unfolds, don't argue. Don't start pointing fingers. Simply make your position clear. That isn't mine. I don't know anything about it, and I do not consent to any search of my person or my belongings. 3 separate statements: ownership, knowledge, consent. Each one addresses a different legal issue, and together they make your position unmistakably clear. Now, for one of the questions I get asked more than almost any other, can you just walk away? If you haven't been lawfully detained, you can ask a simple question: am I free to leave? If the officer says yes, then yes, you can leave. But here's what usually happens. Instead of a clear answer, you'll hear something like, "Just hang on a minute," or "We're almost done here." If you don't get a clear yes, don't walk away. Whether or not you ultimately had the legal right to leave, walking away can quickly escalate the encounter and may give the officer additional facts they'll later point to in justifying a detention. More importantly, it creates unnecessary risk for you. The smarter approach is simple. Protect yourself with your words, not your movements. Assert your rights clearly, remain calm, and let your attorney challenge any constitutional violations later in court. Winning an argument on the side of the road isn't the goal. Protecting your rights is. Now, let's talk about what happens if, despite doing everything right, the stop goes sideways anyway. The officer finds something in the car. The driver says something that implicates you. The officer decides your refusal to hand over ID means you're hiding something. From this point forward, your job is no longer to explain, your job is to protect your rights. Say one sentence and then stop talking. I want a lawyer and I'm not answering any questions until I speak to one. That is it. No explaining. No, but I didn't do anything. No trying to talk your way out. You have clearly invoked your Fifth Amendment right to counsel and right to remain silent. Once you've done that, don't undermine those rights by continuing the conversation. Remember, shut up and lawyer up. Stay calm. Don't resist. Cooperate with lawful instructions during the booking process and contact an attorney as soon as possible. And remember, don't say anything on the jail phone. Here's the bottom line. Being a passenger should be the simplest legal position to be in during a traffic stop. You weren't driving, you didn't commit the traffic violation, and at least at the beginning of the stop, you weren't the reason the officer pulled the car over. But passengers often don't know where their rights begin and the driver's responsibilities end. That confusion leads people to volunteer information, consent to searches, or hand over identification when the law doesn't require it. Know your rights before emergency lights ever appear in your rearview mirror. Stay calm, say the right words, and let your attorney fight the legal battle where it belongs, in court, not on the side of the road. Knowing your rights as a passenger is only half the equation. If you're the driver, the rules are different, and one wrong decision can turn a simple traffic stop into a criminal investigation. That's exactly what I covered in my next video. I'll walk through a traffic stop from the moment emergency lights come on and explain what officers can do, what they can't do, and the biggest mistakes people make. If you want the complete picture, watch that video next. It's on your screen now. Click it before you go. And if you were a passenger during a traffic stop and you're now facing criminal charges in Oklahoma, my office may be able to help. Our contact information is in the description below. If you have questions about passenger rights during traffic stops, leave them in the comments. I read every one, and your question might become the topic of a future video.